Overwatch 2, the next iteration of the highly successful hero shooter by Blizzard. If you have enough interest or knowledge on this game to have clicked on this video, I'm sure you already have an understanding of the premise and gameplay, but in case this is your first introduction to Overwatch as a whole, a quick refresher before I jump into my thoughts on the Overwatch 2 beta. And as a side note, for the main bulk of this video, I'm only really exploring gameplay and balance, both directly and indirectly introduced in the Overwatch 2 beta in this video, as well as my opinions on them. If you're really interested in deeper exploration of other elements, I guess let me know in the comments below. What is Overwatch? At its core in the hero shooter genre, Overwatch is a first-person shooter where two teams of 6 heroes duke it out on one of many potential locations. Each hero in the game holds their own gameplay identity and combines traditional shooter gameplay with slight ability reliance found in MOBAs. The objective to win the game will be based on the map you're playing on. If any more explanation is required to understand the absolute basics of this game, I'm afraid you won't find it in this video. So, core gameplay. Okay, yeah, we're tackling an elephant in the room first, 5v5. No longer will the staple composition of the team be 2 tanks, damage, and supports. Going forward, there will be only 1 tank on either team. Over the 6 years this game has been released, many individual heroes, comps, or even specific hero synergies have been problematic at one point or another. In most any game, you would expect these issues to be fixed through balance patches and the community could just go about their days in peace. But over the past couple of years, the emphasis that the tanks posed on the evolution of the meta has just posed too much of a nuisance on the balance team, and I think this change to solo tank will make their jobs a lot easier. So in that regard, I am a fan of this change. It betrays the game's original design and balance philosophy, but doesn't sacrifice the gameplay you know and love, and have come to expect from Overwatch over the years. This can garner some gut reactions and negative responses at first glance, but I think anybody who gives the new environment a try won't be sorely disappointed by this change as a whole. Tanks as a whole in Overwatch the past few years have made how much fun can be had in Overwatch sort of a zero-sum game at best. Depending on how strong or weak specific tanks were, one or multiple groups of people ended up not being able to play Overwatch the way it was meant to be played, or the way that they wanted to play. No single individual change to any hero would have been enough to fix this because of the overall creeped value that tanks provide. I think in concept this change to 1 tank is that something more that was needed. It does come with its own hurdles that I think need addressed, but taking a step back and analyzing all the positives and negatives it brings to the game, I say with confidence this is better a change than it is worse. My biggest complaint in regards to the new 5v5 are that the bandage tune-ups they give to certain roles and heroes just aren't in line with how vulnerable one is with the concept of an off-tank and accessible CC being essentially dead. A handful of heroes haven't been scaled down in proportion to the game's new environment at all. Both teams in this new game state inherently have more glass and cannon to their name, but the former feels a lot heavier than the latter, which I'll go more into as necessary. Yes, Assault, or 2CP as the community refers to it, is gone. This mode actually gets a lot of flack from a majority of the vocal community, but I've never had too much of a problem with it myself. Yes, it has its problems, but I don't think the inherent flaws the mode possessed were so much unfixable as I believe the Overwatch team just didn't know how to fix it, and this is their lazy solution for the matter. And yeah, that is a blow directed toward the Overwatch team. No disrespect or harm intended, of course, and I won't go into the point any further here, but I am disappointed to say the least that we're losing an entire mode with a handful of the maps associated with it. That said, the removal of the mode luckily won't equate to a less potential content, and by extension stale-feeling gameplay, because it's not actually a removal so much as a replacement. We're getting Push, a fun, fresh, revitalizing take on how much the game can be played. It combines the map fluidity of Escort with the heated, low downtime gameplay of Control. I've been asking for a competitive mode like this ever since I got a taste of how fun Capture the Flag was in this game, and speaking of, I'm also extremely disappointed that CTF still hasn't been adapted into comp rotation. The disappointment I hold toward Assault being removed from comp is the exact same way I feel about CTF never even having been added in the first place. Comparing both sides of the coin, however, Push replacing Assault is anything but bad. The mode poses you with an objective that draws elements from Assault, Escort, and Control all in one, and what's funny is the names of these modes are the exact elements that were pulled from them respectively. Why this mode works and Assault did not is where completing a checkpoint was enough to get you to the next round in Assault. In Push, a checkpoint gets you nothing more than a forward spawn. What makes this game mode so great in comparison to Assault is that it's a mode about both pushing and push back, which is a concept before this mode existed was hardly present. Phase, only really achievable through Moira, Reaper, and Mei's defensive abilities, now not negating both tank grav ults feels right. The game has been pretty dodgy and consistently forcing their mechanical rules across all heroes fairly, and that's putting it lightly. I stand by this change, but it's only the beginning of a handful of consistency adjustments that need to go through. It's obvious to me, however, this change only saw the light of day because the value of what a tank is and can provide has to be elevated to meet the new 5v5 environment. Armor health now mitigates 30% of all damage rather than half of any individual instance of damage up to 5. In old Overwatch, this meant single hit burst heroes such as Widowmaker, Zen, or McCree were inherently better at tank shredding, while heroes who applied damage through numerous instances of smaller damage had a harder time, such as Soldier, Moira, and Reaper. In new Overwatch, this now means all forms of damage are negated in equal value. Now, everybody is on the same playing field when fighting tanks, and even just toying around with damage breakpoints in the practice range can give you a pretty eye-opening realization as to how powerful this change is for any hero lucky enough to have armor. As a support player myself, I like this change because it simplifies and exaggerates at the same time how one can or has to balance the healing economy between their team. Beyond equalizing everyone's footing when fighting tanks, this system-wide adjustment to the inherent value of armor being more than that of regular health now follows a consistent formula and has a specific purpose. You might ask, why have 100 armor when you could just have 130 health? The answer is healing. Armor is an increase in effective HP, yes, but the purpose it serves is that it's like a tightly packed bubble of health that gets healed in the same amount of time. This relationship between the value of healing and armor has always been present. We now just have a formula that is both more fair and more consistent across the game. For every 1 point of armor on, say, Arisa, Reinhardt, or Brigitte, they have 30% more health and receive 43% more healing in comparison to that damage. We refer to this as effective HP, meaning how much survivability you really have when you apply these factors. Though, as a support main, I like to think of this more as the efficiency and how long it takes your health to go up or down, rather than this theoretical extra health you have, but it's all the same either way. Overhealth now exists. Any overhealing effect in this game now shows as a green pocket of health at the front of your health bar. This accounts for Arisa's new Fortify, Hammy's Shield, Doom's passive, Torb's Overclock, and Lucio and Briggs' ults. It has no inherent value attached to it, it's just temporary health. For consistency purposes, I'm a fan of this, but if I have any comments on how it affects specific heroes, I'll mention it when I get to them. The new scoreboard screen gives us exactly what we've been asking for ages now, team-wide numbers. Who has golds is a thing of the past, and I'm sure the medals being gone is only temporary, but a small part of me wishes it weren't. Maybe a top performer indicator, maybe top 2, but the premise of medals, while being valuable, is often lost on the typical player, and also at times can be a bit of a redundant feature in your comp is built a certain way. Even in Grandmaster, I hear man-children ranting about their gold damage on Genji or silver healing on Roadhog, and even in cases where these medals do reflect value, they're not simply one-to-one direct correlations. There's more to this game than who has the highest numerical value provided of a specific mechanic. With some more time getting used to the new look, it's only natural we'll adjust to the layout and recognize where to look at a moment's glance, but my only real nag is that I believe the ult cooldowns should show more centered in the screen. If they moved everything over to the side and jumped the ult column to the far right, that screen would be perfect. I'm intrigued to see what else, if anything, they do with the new scoreboard, because outside of what there's now, I haven't put much thought into what I'd like to get out of it, but I definitely recognize there are some interesting features it could be accented with, such as a CC score tracker or biggest threat indicator. This is purely subjective, so there's no right or wrong to this. It's a matter of taste and opinion and nothing more. Getting used to the new sounds is definitely eye-opening. It's been a long time since playing this game and actually having to ask myself who I hear shooting down the choke, and that at least is a welcoming experience. It feels nice learning again. My biggest confusion is thinking new Sojourn Primary Fire sounds like old Widow Primary Fire, and I don't think Sojourn Grenade gives off a recognizable enough audio cue, but that could be my not having to learn a new hero in over 2 years talking. The audio feels like a number of things either skewed more into realistic sounds, and the rest jump to the gun and sound more like sci-fi pew-pews. I don't know if I think that's a bad thing or not. I'm not sure if I've properly developed an opinion on that quite yet at all. I think that comes down more to me just not caring really about more authentic or fancy sounds. It's not what's important to me as a competitive gamer. I care more about the recognition factor. This feels less like a point to be made in general, as it's really not a systemic change, but rather a pattern of changes across all the heroes. But I'd rather tackle heroes individually by role, so I want to say this up front before I get into all the roles. The team has heavily removed or downtuned the accessibility of crowd control and received much praise for doing so. I as well can side with this philosophy with my entire being. Yes, crowd control is important in games such as these and provides interesting opportunities and ways to combat your enemy, but if it becomes too common, too much, too oppressive, etc., it becomes a problem, and we have to realize we aren't playing Call of Duty, but we also aren't playing League of Legends. I believe the team made this pattern of changes with the best intentions, but in effect hurt the game in as many ways as they helped in doing so. I'll explain to you each scenario in which they have done so as I get to each hero, but I'd like to just pull up some math to get the numbers across, so that you may better understand why I feel this way and how I come to this conclusion. To start, I would classify CC in Overwatch in one or more of three categories: slows, hard crowd control, and boops. Hard crowd control being anything that restricts player control, and boops being anything that moves, pushes, or pulls your target. I'm going to count each and everything in every role and hero that possesses any of these forms of CC in both live and beta, and just show what roles or heroes have the most access to these CC mechanics, and the direction the team seems to be pushing the game. So, what do these numbers mean? Tanks are clearly intended to be the primary engagers. They have the greatest ability to manipulate the enemy team, and create openings out of anything that isn't strictly a kill or damage pressure. Damage has been shied slightly more away from being CC heavy than they already were, and I think the way they did that is extremely healthy for the game. Tanks have the highest concentration of CC, which isn't inherently problematic, seeing as now there can only be one tank present on a team. Damage really shouldn't have been so CC heavy in the first place, just speaking in terms of what they are supposed to provide from their role in such a team play heavy game, and supports have next to no CC available to them and even lost one of their only two hard CCs from this patch. Support feels more gutted than they already were, and I personally feel as though the team viewed support as an afterthought when bringing their heroes up to speed. All I can glean from this is tanks are supposed to be raid bosses, damage are supposed to be mobile killers, and supports are supposed to heal, and get dove, and deal with it. Unless they're Ana, and their 15-second cooldown is ready. Tanks. So the role passive first. The tank knockback resistance feels like a double-edged sword, and I'm perfectly okay with that. On one hand, 30% feels like far too much, especially for heroes such as Zarya or Hog, who traditionally are seen more easily as glorified damage heroes than true tanks. Part of your dumb lizard brain wants to just boop them off the map, or out of proper positioning when you're playing Pharah or Lucio, for example, but it's just not really possible anymore. But on the other hand, should it really be? These are supposed to be the scary force on the enemy team. The tank. The Titan. They're intended to stand strong to whatever you throw at them, and in essence, that's what allows there to be team fights. This new passive solidifies even more than before that the tank is the baseline for the team. The ult generation reduction from both damage and healing dealt to tanks is welcome as well. Barriers and damage negation now largely out of the way, more damage is now actually being applied, and with all tanks now having higher HP pools and a larger target on their head as the sole spearhead of the team, they're in an environment where they're naturally going to be taking a lot more damage, and that damage translating into more frequent ultimates wouldn't be the death of the game, but this certainly helps lean the game away from the ult reliance rut it's found itself in on occasion. Doomfist as a tank was surprising to say the least, but I'm not against it. It works well enough, and every little gap that's closed between the role pool sizes is always appreciated. I think like most people, I would see more tank potential out of Mei or Bastion. Mei, I'm solely convinced they didn't make a tank purely because of her size, and Bastion I'm still a proponent of at least the concept, but I do like the direction he's been pushed in for the damage role, but that's besides the point. In regards to Doom, firstly, his rocket punch does feel oddly weak after being an avid Doomfist enjoyer all this time, which hurts the soul somewhat. But for the sake of the question, does tank Doomfist work, and is it good for the game? I'll look past my own disappointment on this one small point. It serves a great purpose for Doom as a dive tank, and being on the receiving end of his right click isn't a keyboard slammer anymore. The new Seismic Slam combines the mobility power of his entire kit all into one button press, which feels exciting. The speed and versatility of the ability just feels natural for anyone familiar with and comfortable on Doomfist, and maintains his status as an engage for the team. Power Block feels like a proper defensive tool for Doomfist, and it feels like a proper defensive tool for a tank. I like that they kept his playstyle very selfish and personal. He uses Power Block for himself and no one else. And if used well enough, it gives him a brief glimpse into what he used to be and land a serious hit from his rocket punch. Meteor Strike was brilliantly translated over to his new identity. Its functionality is still very similar, but you really notice the knockback being replaced by a slow, and it makes sense. It's no longer an ultimate designated as this assassination strike to shake things up. Meteor Strike now plays more like a breach that provides dive opportunity for your team. It's that earthquake that unsettles the prey mere moments before disaster strikes. So, all in all, tank Doomfist sounds almost odd on paper, but not totally unrealistic. You can connect the dots and understand why he could or should be a tank, but what I really like is he's not a guardian, he's not a protector, he's a highly mobile brute, and he's allowed to keep that identity even across roles. They didn't try to compensate his health pool and size to fit more into what the tank line traditionally is, and that was the right move. His passive granting overheal off his abilities helps maintain him in the fight and supplements his new responsibilities as tank, while still holding on to as much of his core kit as possible, which is a nice homage. Whether Doom can access the backline has never been in question, and as a tank it still isn't. Doom fits perfectly as a dive tank alternative, and what he lost in his ability damage, you have to remember he's going to start making up for in his primary fire, which, while deals less damage per pellet now, is much more accessible, both allowing for and shifting him more toward a shooter identity as opposed to this mage-like ability-reliant playstyle he's always had. Diva is the first of many heroes here who really wasn't given anything new or flashy for the beta, but just touching on her given the dramatic shift to 5v5 is warranted. Diva as a soul tank fits a unique identity. There are few mechanics in this game that outright remove projectiles from the field of battle, and Diva's very accessible defense matrix is the perfect kind of out-of-left-field primary defensive function for a team to play under. Though its inability to deal with a select handful of abilities and attacks does pose a clear opportunity to play into her at the same time. For being a tank, she has a unique, but not totally crippling vulnerability to beams, and a select few projectiles in particular, as well as to a much lesser extent melee. This as well as a lack of self-sustain, though she compensates for this with her accessible and fluid mobility. I find it odd when looking at the health pool changes to the rest of the tank lineup, but reasonable to her in particular that they whittled 100 armor off her in favor of 150 health. It feels as though they were presenting Diva as the compromise between all the tank playstyles. She has just enough in her kit and health pool to dive, frontline, or peel as necessary, and I think that potential will prove invaluable as people start to understand her very unique ability to do this. I'm iffy on new Arisa. Is new Arisa fun, engaging, powerful? Yeah, but in a game that's tried to shine all its characters in a unique light since day one, it hurts to see the bunker tank become everything that she stood headstrong against. I'm not going to base my entire review of her kit on this feeling, but I wanted to set a precedent that I'm not behind what they've done to her. Down to the core of what she as a character has always represented, I think this change is disgusting and unfaithful to her entire purpose. That out of the way, new Arisa plays really well as a titan of a tank. The problem is she plays too well. With how universally powerful her kit is, there's almost never a moment when playing Arisa where you can't just hold W, and few comps or maps where just picking her at all is suboptimal. Her primary fire has been almost divified to prolong her ability to spam down any fight near limitlessly. Energy Javelin is a 7-second cooldown with a 2-point stun attached, essentially being a ranged Doomfist punch with a negligibly longer cooldown. Her new Fortify gives her plenty of everything she needs, and the 20% move speed reduction is pathetically ineffective at presenting the counterplay I assume it's intended to. Javelin Spin is unnecessarily the third tank ability that just deletes projectiles, but even more unnecessarily also highly enhances her forward charging power with the bullying potential of a glimpse of Roadhog ult. Her new ultimate I'm less critical of. It's unfortunate to see the bongo go, but it feels refreshing to see Terra Surge come in. This feels like a new tank ult done right, and I like that it makes her feel more like a MOBA tank rather than just another FPS gimmick hero. New Arisa is fucking outstanding, and that pisses me off. Not because Arisa finally gets to shine, but because after all the mistakes the Overwatch team has made, they pull this. I know I'm just one person, but I feel I properly distance my opinions on balance from my sense of ego, favoritism, or otherwise illogical bias, and unless she gets down-tuned, I don't see myself budging from this take. Reinhardt is the brawl tank. He runs in, swings his hammer, flashes that big, beautiful, sexy shield of his here and there, and swings his hammer again for good measure. He's the tried and true example of what a tank has always been capable of in this game, and stands the test of time. Some tankiness has been taken away from his barrier field and inserted into his own personal survivability, which is, with every tank I can totally understand, given his newly acquired solo tank status. His barrier field still has 1200 HP, which is still a godsend when you're playing a melee hero the size of a truck. Charge has been hit with the quality of life hammer, does a little less damage toward the beefiest of targets with an 8-second cooldown instead of 10. It can still one-shot pretty much anybody not in the tank slot, but considering the level of danger it puts himself in outside of catching mispositioned targets, it's not entirely uncalled for. The extra fire strike, albeit at 10 less damage, isn't unwelcome either. If Reinhardt has always been the standard for what a tank can be, new Reinhardt is the standard for what a new tank can be, full stop. Roadhog has always been the lazy tank, and I don't say that in a negative light. He fulfills a great place in this game, both from a fun gameplay standpoint and general gameplay balance. Sometimes you just don't need or want a hefty shield to walk behind. Sometimes it just takes one dude running forward, slamming people's health bars with utter disregard to his own, and I'm glad they kept that as his sole identity. All that's changed here is he's gained an extra 100 HP and 50 healing off his Take a Breather, so it still totals half his HP pool. No complaints, and any suggestions would be minor and not necessary so much as they are ideas posed out of curiosity. Sigma feels like the most slept on tank out of this beta. He has an extra 100 shield health, which is great for regenning out of combat. Accretion hits a little harder, and his barrier regen rate is down by a sixth. Sigma got what Reinhardt did, but diet as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't revamp how well he can play or feel any much better, and if anything puts him in a little more of a worse spot than he was before. I'd be surprised if he didn't get more love than this by release, but as is now, I'm just unimpressed. As far as how powerful and meaningful a change the tanks received, I'd place Winston between Ryan and Sigma. He got a little bit of TLC where he could, and something new to his kit that feels both natural and needed given his inherent weaknesses, and how different the game has become from 5v5 being introduced. I think in the grand scope of what a tank needs to accomplish, they didn't hurt Winston's dive, but they slapped a band-aid on his brawl and poke, so he wouldn't be a fish out of water outside of his element, and had a little more to work with when he was. Hammy really shook up the game when he was first introduced, and challenged the community's expectations of how a main tank could, well, main tank. He already has the necessary tools to function in a 5v5 setting, so his changes seemed to just be minor touch-ups to keep his game up there with the rest of the tank line. An extra 50 health and armor each, as well as some more potency and forgiveness on his adaptive shield, is nothing to scoff at for survivability, and are fairly grounded changes I can get behind as well. A little more health and shield to compensate for her solo status, and a shared bubble system to give more power to bubbling herself or allies are two strong buffs that really help build up Zarya in the new game state. The energy degen increase is a bit of a shame, but her having more opportunities to optimize usage of her bubbles certainly helps her gain more charge in the first place. Her bubble uptime actually comes out higher because the cooldown starts on use rather than after expiration, with the bubble duration itself being extended by half a second. Overall, solid and reasonable changes to Zarya, and this maintains her stance as this sort of tank that prioritizes threat of damage over defense and protection, but doesn't rule out the latter two as a whole. So as far as the role passive goes, the damage move speed buff feels very welcoming as well. It's not a whole lot, but it's something that playing as damage you will subconsciously notice and incorporate into your expectations of how you can play. Pushing ahead of your team to set up for the next fight feels better. Chasing low HP targets feels better. Running back into your team from danger feels better. Damage, I would argue, feels the most proper role in the game in this current state. Not necessarily healthy or strong or balanced, it just feels like the role is more as it should be than ever before. Maybe not the most perfect fit for every hero in the role, but I don't think it sacrifices any game integrity, at least enough to argue that handing it out to the entire role is a blanket passive. Bob health reduced by 200 is effectively not worth mentioning, but it's worth bringing up why this change happened. With a new Somber rework, honest sleep nerf, and overall downscale of boop frequency, it stands to reason that dealing with Bob outside of flat-out avoidance or killing him would prove more difficult. Bob being just the slightest bit squishier helps shift her power down with those that dealt with her ult most effectively. The Bastion rework, I'm totally behind. I remember asking for much of this almost verbatim on the forums at one point or another, in fact. Bastion's identity has always been a staple, and outright removing that from the game would have been a major mistake. I like that they simply adjusted his identity, and in a very reasonable way at that. His primary fire feels hefty and hard-hitting, no complaints there. The loss of self-repair is another shame, and it will surely be missed, but that's more for the identity than its value, and his identity didn't so much as ride on whether self-repair stayed in the game. Much of Bastion's problem stemmed from how he gained this immense value out of an immense self-inflicted cripple. There was this very hard line to dance across between too strong and too weak that affected different tiers of play completely differently, and this put Bastion and the team in a very awkward spot. All that's changed in regards to his ability 1 is how much he sacrifices and how much he gets out of the ability, but it makes a world of difference for everyone. The new tactical grenade as well feels like a nice augment to Bastion's primary kit, and it giving him a means to rocket jump I think is not only very unexpected and welcome, but a genius move from the team in not only pulling Bastion away from all his controversial design flaws, but actually pushing him closer to the other side of this mobility spectrum. The new ultimate feels more tactical and interesting as well, and less gimmicky than his previous tank form. It feels odd or even clunky when using it as it is now, and I'm interested to see if the team makes it feel any more seamless, but as it is now, it works really well for Bastion. As an interesting side note, and this will tie into a point for the next hero I get into as well, if you're a fan of this new Bastion, you very likely have 5v5 to thank for that. The shift away from barriers, shields, 2 tanks, and plenty of other damage mitigation in this game would put Bastion in even a worse position than before. I'm confident that if the game didn't go this route, Bastion may not have ever received this much needed love. 5v5 seems to have been the breaking point for old Bastion. Though yes, this kills some aspects of the game that revolved heavily around team play and pushes more for a solo carry style of play, Many heroes have become much more individualistic, or in the case of Bastion here, have become individualistic at all. Is that good or bad for the game though? I don't think either, it's just different. Fan the Hammer has been buffed to fire a little faster, which isn't much on its own, but it's nice to know he can technically DPS a little faster after this, and without access to a stun, it feels warranted. I was upset at first glance at the removal of his flashbang because it felt like a staple of his kit and identity, but after consideration and giving it some game time of my own, I actually have little problem with it. Flashbang was always slightly problematic in how easily it could guarantee kills if landed, especially in higher 2-step play. The new magnetic grenade lets McCree keep that kill pressure that Flashbang gave him, but it's contained more to follow up from earned shots rather than granting free ones. Utilizing the new magnetic grenade grants a greater sense of pride and accomplishment to both the player pulling off the combo and the victim of it, even if the combo only requires a single shot on a squishy. That said, I am of the opinion that with how both forgiving magnetic grenade is and the damage it deals, it needs to be tuned down, but it's still a healthier tool for the game state than Flashbang ever was. What I think most people won't understand at first is the reasoning behind the 40% reduced damage received while in Deadeye. You have to consider with fewer barriers, shields, etc. in the game that McCree is putting himself in even more danger than before. Most sense of peeling in this game is gone outside of just raw damage. I mean, he can't even peel for himself anymore with no flashbang. For a hero that inflicts sitting duck syndrome on himself to provide value, I feel this defensive change was well thought. Though maybe could be tuned down to 25% or so. Fuck Echo. Yeah, I'm an Echo hater. Get over it. I'm one of the few people who thinks she should have been a support, and I will argue that into the ground until either myself or this game is dead. Now that that's out of the way, we can actually get into her changes. Her focusing beam damage on half health targets is reduced from 200 to 175. Not nearly enough, and honestly just screams a lack of effort on the part of whoever was responsible for this. I understand it's targeted toward her finishing potential in tanks, and that's much appreciated, but the level of power it holds in her kit when combined with all the other tools she has access to is just simply too much as far as I'm concerned. The thing is, I'm a huge fan of abilities and mechanics that really gain their value off your health bar being in different states too. One of my favorite champions in League of Legends, for example, is Pyke, a support that literally insta-kills you with his ult if you get too low, granting himself and the last assisting ally extra money. But Overwatch does an absolutely horrid attempt at implementing health-based mechanics and damage, and you will not hear the end of me from that. I hated it when Sigma was introduced with 50% HP on ult slam, and I hate that Echo does a metric fuck ton of damage to someone below half HP with her beam. They're cheap implementations of HP scaled abilities, and done so lazily and without care or thought that whoever made these decisions shouldn't be legally allowed within 50 meters of a developmental build of any video game. Duplicate maxing health gained at 300 health is a fucking godsend though. Her ult has always been done very poorly, and this is a major step in the right direction for her. If you can't tell, I want to be an Echo supporter, but with how she was introduced, how they continued to balance her, how she was originally intended to be played, alongside the fact that it's been 2+ years since she was released as the final hero, I hold nothing but salt and angst towards her. I assure you, however, that I genuinely believe the things I've said from a balancing standpoint. I'm just also allowing my preconceptions and personal anger toward everything surrounding her seep into my writing style. Storm Arrows losing 5 damage seems like more of a band-aid to the solo tank adjustment. I'm not against it, it does make sense. I actually wish we saw more of that from the higher burst damage heroes in this game. Not much else to add, but this deserves the commendation. Steel Trap is all that's affected, and it's a fair adjustment I might add. His hard CC is tackled, now only heavily slowing anyone he traps, dealing more damage, and a quicker projectile makes it the tiniest bit more accessible. A healthy change for the overall game, and an appreciated band-aid compensation in return. Okay, if they removed the freezing mechanic as a whole, I would have been pissed. There's already a handful of iconic features that have been gutted this beta, and I couldn't stand to see this one go as well. They made a really healthy decision for the game by setting her primary fire to a flat half slow, but upping its damage to reflect that of most any other hero designed to deal damage from such a close range. On top of that, the slow duration even fades in half the time, and I think that works really well and solidifies her primary fire as damage first and slow second, as it should be. I think the ammo increase from 120 to 150 personally wasn't called for. I've toyed around a lot with Nume, and it just didn't feel necessary to her. If anything, I think they could have just scaled their secondary fire to take 8 ammo in place of 10 if they wanted to even out the new rate of ammo expenditure. Cryofreeze not removing the grab effect feels good for the consistency of the tanks, and since it was still grants invulnerability, it doesn't feel like the worst trade-off for her kit. I'm a little saddened to see Ice Wall become what it was. I'm a little saddened to see Ice Wall become what it has, but that's because I want to see her in the tank slot with an Ice Wall that reflects the power she would inherit from being so. As a damage hero though, I think Ice Wall is fine. There's less emphasis on it, but it still accomplishes the few things she uses it for, and it has more room for team counterplay now, which always feels nice in a competitive environment. The ult cost increase, as far as I'm concerned, is warranted. If it had lost its freeze effect as well, then the increase would be uncalled for, but this is just to keep her ult progression with a new primary fire in line so it fits. Overall, this seems like a great change for the Mei enjoyers. She's escaped niche status and can be played more regularly with as high a rate of viability and regularity as any other damage hero, and it's not because of some busted synergy or cancer lack of counterplay, it's just because she's a properly strong option now. Usually I'm a huge fan of shotguns in games, but Overwatch hits different for me with the jump away from real-world application of logic like player size, weapon damage values, player health, shields, bullet penetration, etc. Really, this is just a convoluted means to say shotguns aren't my cup of tea in Overwatch. I'm not the biggest fan of Torb and Reaper, and while Doom and Diva are much more tolerable, they aren't so much the true reflection of what a shotgun hero would traditionally be. This does just come down to my personal preference and play, but I thought I should preface that I may be slightly biased in this opinion related to the mechanic itself. With armor taking a big hit to its effectiveness against shotguns, I could stand to see the reason behind the 0.6 damage nerf from Reaper's pellets, but I don't agree with that reason. Reaper has rarely felt like he does enough in this game, and a large contribution to why I feel that way is from his pellet spread, which also got a 2-point increase in the beta. Maybe the dev's reasoning is, with tanks being more universally affected by damage, that a hero such as Reaper needs to be tuned down with the environment, using the same philosophy behind McCree's new damage resistance and ult, or Hanzo's storm arrow reduction in damage, but I just don't see it as much. I'm not completely sold one way or the other, I just feel like it's too much. Though I rarely touch Reaper outside of norms, so if anybody who regularly plays and or enjoys the shotgun-esque heroes in this game could provide their opinion in the comments below, I'd love to hear you out. As far as new heroes go, yeah, let's get out of the way the obvious disappointment that she's a damage hero. We knew this going in, we're expecting more tanks and supports before the eventual release of Overwatch 2, so let's hold our breath for what sort of fun and interesting heroes we may get by then. But as far as her release, how she plays, how she fits into this game, it feels pretty seamless and natural. She manages to bring a new take to the stereotypical soldier holding gun trope, which isn't really what we need or want in the game, but it's never outright unappreciated. She provides that sort of electric feeling and mobility similar to what Black Ops 3 did for Call of Duty for those familiar. Her primary feels like a solid, lighter alternative to soldiers, with her charge-up railgun secondary providing her those key moments to also hit hard like Ashe or Widowmaker, and it's an interesting take on how to pace out her usage of it as well. By landing hits with her primary, her one-shot potential is tied to a reward mechanic rather than being always on, and it exists as a feast or famine tool almost in that if she doesn't land it, she doesn't just get to try again. She's got to work back up to it. I don't know if I agree with the strength of it being a one-shot headshot, but it feels more fair than playing against Widow, so I have bigger fish to fry if I were to dish out compliments of one-shots at all. The power slide feels a little restrictive in that she can only keep momentum in one direction, but the jump at the end feels like a lot when playing her and doesn't seem too crazy when against. The disruptor shot I'm not a fan of, but it's more that it just seems overtuned to the slightest degree. After outright removing or moving half of the CC in the game to the tank role, it feels like the devs really cheated their own rule on CC by adding an area of effect damage over time slowing grenade to the new damage hero. It's not Widow insta-kill levels of bullshit, but it does too many things and it does them too well at that. Overclock as an ultimate is almost borderline OP, but I can't actually bring myself to outright say that it is. Yes, it gives temporary easy access to her alt fire and grants them piercing, but there's still a pacing to it, and the lack of any real scope or zoom to her kit makes it much more difficult and less effective at long ranges, which is when one-shots really hit their status as annoying. The insta-kill nature of it still requires the same skill and effort she has to put into any other alt fire she throws out. I'll have to give the game a lot more time and see how the game state develops before I can comment further on her, but her release as a damage hero has been handled very well so far, which can't be said for the few most recent heroes. Sombra has long since been another problem child of the game. She provides an interesting mechanic, but in many different cases it's either proven too annoying or too strong to deal with. I think this rework is a good direction for her, however. The primary damage and spread reduction makes her damage less oppressive in theory to the recipient, but more forgiving and comfortable in practice to the player. Hack has been almost fundamentally changed from the ground up other than its obvious bare-bones intention, but it's a good direction to say the least. The cooldown does feel far too accessible, even if it only truly hacks for 1 second now instead of 5, but as with a number of things I have and will continue to talk about, the net gain in game health is higher than the net loss. They made her feel more seamless in that stealth is quicker and hack doesn't cancel stealth, but still reveals you as you do so. The stealth detection radius going from 2 to 4 meters also just feels appreciated and makes a Sombra attempting to infiltrate actually have to walk on eggshells rather than just hug any wall to get where she wants to go. Her new passive now also grants her entire team side of hacked targets through walls and increases her personal damage dealt to them by 40%. Maybe it's because I've been playing a lot of League of Legends, but 40% sounds like a lot. But when put in practice in a game such as Overwatch, it really means even in the most dire of situations, she's killing you in a few shots more than previous, and that's about it. Which, yes, is still monumentous for her, but not game-breaking. Now, if you're familiar with the changes, I'm sure you're just ecstatic to hear my take on Sombra ult after my rant on Echo's HP scaling damage. Gut reactions aside, this actually isn't too bad and could have been done way worse. And I kid you not, I was prepared to create an entire fucking religion revolving around why whoever let this in the game shouldn't be a game developer, not even 4 seconds before beginning to write this paragraph. That is until I sit here now and do the math on how much damage that really is on each hero. Even Roadhog is only taking 280 damage at full down to 520. And if he's half, it's only 140, landing him at 210. At full health, Squishy is taking 80 damage down to 120, even, which isn't the worst. The only reason she can get away with this is because her hack now lasts 1 second, but hey, the entire point of doing balance changes like these are so that heroes can get away with things, so I feel I'm obligated to let this one slide. As a player, I don't support the change completely, but as a proponent of unbiased balance, I think this works really well for her and maintains her ultimate identity as a major AoE blow to a whole team, which is very handy for her as a hero with a primary kit geared toward assassinating and duel-centric gameplay. Everyone's favorite poster child is losing a solid 13% of her primary fire damage output. Nothing more, nothing less. No ult damage or cooldown buffs or nerfs, no health changes, just this. 5 damage per shot instead of 6. This is highly fucking respectable, and I'm honestly shocked that they didn't do some overtuning with her alongside this. There's really not a whole lot to go off here though, so same concept as the Hanzo changes. Put a bullet in my brain now. Okay, yeah, you've heard it 10 times already this video. There's only one tank, people need more survivability or less damage output, but how the fuck are they gonna give Widow back at her 200 health and still not touch her secondary fire? I get there are two sides of the Widow argument, and I think it's pretty obvious which side of the argument I'm on from my tone in these few statements alone. She shouldn't be in the game as she is now. She just shouldn't. There's not much to be said about her that hasn't already, and that's just my opinion and I'm going to stand by it. Okay, supports. As far as the role passive goes, the 15 healing per second after a single second of not taking damage feels like a lazy hand wave from whoever was tasked with giving supports their own passive. Half of the supports it feels really convenient on almost all the time, particularly the ones who can make use of it through their ability to evade or escape danger, and or maneuver around the battlefield with higher mobility. Other supports make next to no use out of it, or their value gained from it is cosmetic at best. It's useful, yeah, I'm not denying that, but it's not right. It's not what the role needed. I don't even know if I could say right now what that role does need. Maybe with some proper time theorizing and toying around with ideas I could throw out a few, but as a hardcore support fanatic who's played his fair share of matches in higher tier play, this feels laughable. Less insulting would have been just no passive for supports at all. Give anybody who needs a power shift something that fits appropriately for them. The disparity in who does and doesn't make use of this passive is immense, and I think sets a clear tone for the lack of thought put into support as a whole in this entire beta. Is support dead because of this? No, but support doesn't really gain anywhere near equal value from this passive what they lost in their off-tank and peel. And this may be controversial, but I don't fucking think Tracer full clipping a support, taking 6 more shots, makes up for the fact we only have one tank. Sleep Dart cooldown has been extended from 12 to 15 seconds. I approve of this change. It hasn't really felt like it's ruined the hero for the time I've played on her, and puts more emphasis on the care she has to play with. Other than that, she wasn't changed, but as a heavily passionate player of this game, I'm still appalled that Bionic Grenade still completely disallows healing for its duration. The versatility of it being a heal capable of both buffing and debuffing is stellar and provides a lot of power to the player to make decisions between using it offensively and defensively. But the unrivaled impact it has to any other ability in this game considering what it does is pathetic, and that's on top of the still extremely high value rest of her kit. For as long as this stays in the game in its current state, instead of having healing or something or other, I will forever hold resentment towards Ana when speaking on balance in this game. Primary fire damage fall-off starts sooner, and the self-heal goes from 75 to 100. I have no strong opinions toward this, but it's one of a multitude of changes this patch that leads me to believe the devs really just want the supports in this game to be helpless heal bots, and that greatly upsets me. Inspire passive now procs off of Shield Bash, so about time, I guess? Shield Bash now goes 70% further, has a 5-second cooldown instead of 7, and does 50 damage instead of 1, but at the cost of it no longer stunning? This is another change that, as a support player, absolutely convinces me that whatever the new philosophy the Overwatch team has for supports is completely back-asswards. Brigitte, since her conception, has been the peel support. her shield bash being the staple of her kit. I'm still salty at the particularly poor handling of her downfall nerfs over the years, but this is just more icing on the cake personally. The only, and I really mean only, support that can truly protect themselves from danger, particularly dive, in this more volatile game state now is Ana. And yes, that statement does have an element of exaggeration flowing through it, but if you look at the situation for what it is, you understand what I'm saying here. Personally, I think this change was lazy, stupid, uninspired, biased, and wrong. There are plenty of ways to handle balancing her correctly, and none of them are the reality we find ourselves in right now, in my opinion. Ult cost reduced by 12%. This one actually confuses me a tad bit. Don't let my previous tone give off the wrong impression. I'm not annoyed. I'm genuinely confused where the philosophy behind this change comes from. Of all the supports in the game, Lucio is the only one who can't selectively heal his team. He just sort of throws on some tunes and anybody near him heals up. So one tank being missing would hurt any support, yeah, but I don't see how Lucio is the one support that warrants an ult cooldown buff. Even the reduced ult charge from healing and damage doesn't hurt Lucio any more in particular than other supports, and there's no major argument as to healing the now extinct off tank having been a large part of Lucio's ult charge. I'm not opposed to this change, I just really like to know where it came from. The only argument I can realistically see is because there's only one tank, your co-support is likely to get more of their single target healing off, leaving Lucio healing to fewer scraps than he was before. That affects lower levels of play and the most hectic of mid-fight healing the most, but any co-support worth their salt knows to let their other support charge their ult as much as they can during lighter skirmishes or downtime. So in essence, I see this as strictly a buff to Lucio. Not so much a band-aid to keep him in line, which I don't have any qualms with by itself, but it feels like he's the only support who's got even remotely any fair treatment here. Passive healing is now just 50% higher than what other supports receive, so 22.5 healing per second instead of 15. I mean, thanks, I guess? This, again, is just lazy. If the devs truly believed they needed to provide Mercy with some sort of compensation buff, why again did they opt into making the cosmetic passive 50% stronger? Every game environment is different, so if you aren't familiar with Overwatch's, let me just say, with the highest authority granted to me, that this is without a shadow of a doubt the most pathetic change of the entire beta. There's no witty one-liner to accompany this point, no comparisons to be made, this is just stupid. It doesn't and shouldn't need explanation why that's the case. If there were one thing in this entire beta I could change, it would be the support passive as a whole, hands down. Now the heroes that just weren't touched this patch. If Tracer deals less damage outright, Sombra does as well and has to pull a combo to deal more, Mei can't cancel combo, Doomfist loses dive insta-kill combo status, Brigitte can't shut down dive as effectively as before, and the off-tank in concept doesn't exist anymore, then tell me why Genji is the same, please? Even if it's just a reduction in deflect timing, a cooldown increase, ammo or fire rate reduction, spread increase or damage nerf, or finally tuning down his objectively overly powerful ult, how the fuck did Genji not getting a band-aid nerf get through alpha? All things considered, Pharah is fairly healthy as of right now in my opinion, and I'm excited to see how the meta and game state evolves for her in the coming months. I theorize Sojourn could prove quite problematic for her, but the openings available to Pharah should also be more bountiful. To the same extent I'm distraught Genji didn't get a band-aid nerf, I'm equally surprised Symmetra didn't get a band-aid buff or tune-up. Symmetra has evolved to be a shield buster. As this game has evolved, shields have become more and more an expectation as standard. The devs now have turned a new leaf and are exploring less barrier-gated gameplay, and I think most of us can stand to enjoy that direction this game is being taken. But Symmetra was reworked for the second time with the intention of being the bane of shields. But now with shields being essentially removed from moment-to-moment gameplay, do the devs not think she could use a power shift? I personally don't think she needs one to stay relevant, but just something seems warranted, right? I don't believe Symmetra is weak, but I do feel the devs put a great deal of her power in her shield battering, and I'm not sure if they're comfortable keeping her as this nuclear counterpick option, or if she simply escaped their sights this beta. Nothing of note, really. I personally feel he's in an acceptable spot and isn't in any dire need of buffs or nerfs. The only thing I can think to point out is Torb's survivability has shifted a slight amount. Overload doesn't provide 100 armor health anymore, just a standard overheal. But the new armor rework does grant his 50 armor health a different level of usefulness and staying up in the fight. Moira I've always had a tough time viewing in a positive light. She's raw stats and not much more, straight up healing and straight up damage, which despite my aversion to her playstyle, it is a good hero for the game. I'm a very strong proponent of utilizing interesting or game-altering mechanics to achieve victory, and as Moira's kit and playstyle as a whole don't speak to me in this game, I just have little to say. I would propose utility be added to her kit, but I also acknowledge that's not Moira's identity, and maintaining her pure damage and healing playstyle feels important to keep the Moira experience authentic. Otherwise, it comes down to cooldowns, numbers, or ability tuning, which I don't have any strong opinions on myself. Zenyatta is now in a position of redundancy just as Mercy, and Zenyatta hasn't had anything really going for him for a hot minute. Sombra ult now only hitting him for 80 instead of knocking him to a guaranteed 50 is nice, for his interaction with a single hero in the game. But do tell what the fuck the point of him having 150 shield health is now that he regains 15 of it per second from his passive anyway. Not to mention what hurts Zen the most is dive, and the best tools that help defend off dive more than anything have almost all been either nerfed to further into oblivion, moved to the tank position which no longer can dedicate themselves to healing, or just simply don't exist in the game any longer. As far as I can tell, the game state has been skewed heavily away from Zen's favor. Sure, they hit some of Zen's annoying matchups, namely Tracer, Junk, and Mei, though those also barely reducing their effectiveness against Zen anyway. But Genji escaped this patch unscathed, Hanzo still shoots logs, Reaper will always live up to his name against Zen, McCree, Doom, and Sombra are just different but still great against him, Echo's nerf is insultingly pointless in dive, Bastion no longer has to sit still and take a Zen beating head on, Diva, Winston, and Hammond are all dive tanks that were nothing but buffed, and I'm sure Zens across the world are just ecstatic that Widow got 25 health back, and she's now accompanied by a fast-paced skirmisher field sniper with insta headshots, slowing grenades, and a super jump. If you can't tell, I'm moderately upset here. Zenyatta has always had a clear purpose. The healing is light for the most part outside of your game-changing ultimate of raw healing, but your real power comes from your damage application, with your greatest vulnerability being, well, your vulnerability. You're immobile, have a forgiving hitbox, and nothing to your name to save your life other than your damage itself. And that's what I really respect and enjoy out of Zenyatta. I get to play a satisfying carry damage dealer with some emphasis on my ability to support my team through buffs and debuffs. But if we can go back on our previous philosophy of what this game is as a whole, if over the years this game has existed, we can rebuild over half of our 30 plus heroes. Reworking Diva, Arisa, McCree, Mei, Sombra, Torbjorn, Brigitte, Mercy, and Symmetra twice, move Doomfist to tank, change the game to 5v5 after the confidence we wouldn't do anything so drastic after 1-3-2 hit experimental only once, introduce roll queue, and remove an entire game mode, then we can give Zenyatta some tools for survival, or at least expand upon what he already possesses in his kit, right? I don't care if he gains some benefit from either of his orbs when they are not in deployment, I don't care if Discord orb reduces the damage dealt by its target, I don't care if Zenyatta gets a chunk of armor held in place of his normal health, but he needs something. So, everything in consideration, what do I think of the beta? I'm a huge fan, though it goes without saying it poses its own new and unique challenges and complications to the balancing of the game in current state. Normally, I would say we can look forward to the improvement or even solution of said problems as it's only a beta, but the Overwatch team has also been very adamant and sticking to their decisions, both good, bad, and ugly, over the lifetime of their game. So I would say to go forward in the future betas and eventual release of Overwatch 2, expecting most everything to be very similar as it is presented to you now. Still, be hopeful and be vocal when discussing balance when you can, as even with the stubborn streak the team is known for, it is still a beta. If there's any moment in time where you as a player, where we as a community, have the ability to influence the balance of this game, it is now. I've already said my piece for everything I've wanted to throughout the course of this video, so I don't find it too pertinent to go over it all. I just like to leave off with a positive note. Despite the few stumbles present in this beta, it has thus far proven to be a number of great steps in a right direction for the game, and I have high hopes for what will end up by the release and continued support of Overwatch 2. I'm hopeful and excited for what awaits us in the future, and I'll be sure to voice my thoughts along the way. See you then.